panel discussion on the finance bill, generally known as Union Budget 2022. My name is Raman Jokhakar. I'm a practicing chartered accountant and I also serve as a member of the forum's board. And I also volunteer as the editor of the Bombay Chartered Accountant Journal. I'm delighted to welcome all of you. And this includes our panel members, our office bearers, members of the forum, professionals from professional bodies, students, and everyone else who has joined us this evening. It's great to have you with us for the next 60, 70 minutes. We had heard Mr. Ranina yesterday, forum's chairman, speak on key facets of the union budget, which he has done so brilliantly over last several years. This is the first time that we thought we will have a panel discussion on the union budget, and it's happening in the digital format. I also wish to acknowledge the presence of various associations who have joined in support of these events and their members and students. The Bombay Chartered Accountant Society, Borivali Sanskritik Kendra, Cosmopolitans, Walia College of Commerce and Arts, and the Chamber of Tax Consultants. Thank you. For those who are joining us for the first time at a forum event, I wanted to briefly introduce forum and its activities and a little bit of its history. Forum of Free Enterprise was set up in 1956 by late A.D. Shroff with the object of educating the public on free enterprise and its close relationship with the democratic way of life. He was its founder president from 56 up until 1965. Later, Mr. Murarji J. Vaidya was the president during 65 to 68. And then the legendary Nani Palkhiwala was its president from 1968 all the way up until 2000. Shri A.D. Shroff was a champion of free enterprise, and his contribution to India's economic development in the fields of banking, insurance, and industrial finance is significant. This is well chronicled in the biography titled A.D. Shroff, Titan of Finance and Free Enterprise, written by Sucheta Dalal with the introduction by Shri Nani Palkhiwala. The forum has played a stellar role in educating the public on economic issues and in crusading for free market economy since its inception. World-renowned economists, statesmen, thinkers, jurists, educationists, industrialists, and others have appeared on its platform or authored its booklets, and many of them have highly commended its founder for his contribution to institution building. Forum had the privilege of hosting the historical budget speeches of late Sri Nani Palkhiwala and publishing them for wide circulation. Some of you may have heard him in person or possibly must have read those booklets. The forum was also instrumental in setting up Nani Palkhiwala Memorial Trust and the A.D. Shroff Memorial Trust. About 2,000 booklets and articles have been published, and over 2,500 public meetings have been organized so far. You can follow the events and other activities of the forum on its social media handles, which includes Twitter and YouTube, on which you are hearing us. Coming to the subject proper, which is Budget 2022. It's a very interesting subject that we have in this first week of February each year. And budget has to address innumerable expectations. It's a very difficult job, I think, from a very vast, diverse set of populace. Many people have so many expectations. There are interest groups. People have problems. People want concessions. They want clarification. And budget also builds a direction of the economy. But overall, I feel it looks at, it must address through its outcome uh, towards three parts. The first part is, the most underprivileged, the most needy, those who are in dire need. The budget decides that, how do we bring them what they need in a faster and in a more deserving way so that they can be brought out of poverty, hopelessness, and it does it through home, food, water, health, and so on. The second section to which the budget addresses is the middle class, the taxpayer, the MSMEs, the small businesses, the people who are working, who are paying taxes, who are taking risk, who are consuming, who are investing, who are skilling themselves. And, they are the ones who have come up from the bottom of the pyramid and trying to go up higher. And these are the oil and the wheels of the economy. So budget seeks to address them. And thirdly, budget also needs to address the future if we go into the measure of time, because it talks about infrastructure, it talks about investment climate, it talks about laws. This time you heard about digitization, about a lot of things digital, lot of infrastructure spending which has gone up. So it does something where our future, everyone's future, will be better and brighter and more sustainable. This is broadly the system through which budget addresses these three areas. Oftentimes, budget reverses court decisions too, like it has done this time. So it does some things that we may or may not like. Oftentimes, it capitalizes its vote banks. But this time the budget has been excellent, as we have heard so far. It hasn't tinkered with too many things. It has kept the path that it has chosen last year, and it has continued on that path. So today evening, we are going to have a panel discussion from three experts. One is an economist, one is a direct tax expert, and the third is an indirect tax expert. And these are not just experts, but they are also practitioners. They have years and decades of real experience on the ground. So we are privileged to have their company this evening. I'll introduce them very quickly. Firstly, Dr. Birendra Kumar Bhoi. Dr. Bhoi is a career central banker and an economist. He was principal advisor and head of monetary policy department at the RBI during 2014 to 16, amongst many other important functions that he has held in his long and illustrious career at the RBI. Dr. Bhoi holds PhD from IIT Mumbai in economics. He has served as member, secretary, convener of 27 committees, working groups, task forces set up by Government of India and the RBI. And he has published 23 research papers as well. He continues to deliver lectures and educate students as well as experts on contemporary macroeconomic issues. Dr. Bhoi, welcome and thank you for joining us. We have Mr. Hitesh Gajaria. He's member of the Forum of Free Enterprise for many years. He'll speak on direct taxes. He's a chartered accountant in practice for more than 3 decades. He's a senior partner at KPMG India. His areas of expertise include transfer pricing and FEMA. And as a student also, I have learned a lot from him. Hitesh Bhai has co-authored several publications, including taxation of non-residents, publications on FEMA, transfer pricing, and so on. He also sings really, really well. Hitesh Bhai, thank you for joining us and welcome. We have Sunil Gabhawala with us. Sunil, a good friend. He's an expert on indirect taxes and GST. He's a chartered accountant in practice, and he had got 3rd rank at all India level in his accountancy exam. He's also a cost accountant and a senior partner at SB Gabhawala and Company. His expertise and domain, of course, is GST. his comprehensive treatise on service tax, which was published by Bharat Law House, saw 23 editions. He shares his knowledge through his YouTube channel as well, which has some great videos on GST. He mentors a pan-India community of indirect tax professionals on GST implementation. And he's also a teacher at NMIMS, and he's accredited NACIN trainer as well. Sunil was a past president of the Bombay Chartered Accountants Society, and he's currently the chairman of the Indirect Taxation Committee of the BCA. Sunil, welcome. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So we'll keep this entire panel discussion very focused. There will be an opportunity to ask questions right at the end. You can post your questions on YouTube. Keep them short and pointed, focused on the topic of the day, which is Union Budget 22. And we'll try to take as many as possible. So we'll start with some opening remarks from each of you, starting with Dr. Boy, then Hitesh Bhai and Sunil, about the backdrop, the context, the pain points, the expectations and aspirations, the time during which this budget was presented. Dr. Boy.
Good evening to everybody, fellow panelists, free enterprise office bearers. Thank you for inviting me to give my assessment of the budget. So this is actually, we are passing through a critical time, and therefore one has to think out of the box and evaluate the budget in the context. In the context, I mean the backdrop in which the union government is presenting this budget. One has to understand that we are still in the midst of a corona epidemic. Third wave around the world is still creating havoc in many parts of the country. But nevertheless, now the issue remains that we have to safeguard the livelihood. Life is more or less under control, mainly because of the availability of vaccine and other medicines. So this is the kind of a situation that we are passing through. We have to probably live with corona for some more time. Anyway, one has to see what are the global headwinds at this point of time that the country is facing. One is there is an upside risk to inflation everywhere in the world. Initially, it was asset prices. Now the commodity prices have started rising. And more important is crude oil prices. And the crude oil prices and other commodity prices have started rising. So in this situation, why it is important for us? Now the central banks do not have space to continue with the accommodative monetary policy further. So they have to either change the gear from accommodative to neutral, or they have to tighten. In some jurisdictions, tightening has already started. United Kingdom, UK, Bank of England has already raised the rate. Brazil and other countries, they have already started raising the rate. And it is imminent for the US Fed to raise the Fed fund rate in the March meeting itself. So they have accelerated the taper, and they will stop buying bonds from March 15. This is the kind of situation. Now, when there is a reversal of the interest rate cycle, what will happen to the capital flow to the emerging economy? So it is our past experience. Whenever there is a change in interest rate, particularly reversal, upward swing in the interest rate globally, there is a reversal of capital from the developing country to the developed country, flight to safety. So interest rate cycle, the interest rate differential won't be available. That's why they will desert this developing country. So central banks have no other way except to increase the interest rate. Capital flow to EMI, emerging and market EMEs, may be disrupted due to reversal of the interest rate cycle. Then commodity and crude oil prices pose a greater threat for the world economy as a whole. And the latest world economic outlook, the recent revision shows the global recovery has lost its momentum. So on the one hand, global recovery has lost its momentum. Monetary policy is not having any space to pursue, naturally the call falls on the fiscal authority. The fiscal authority have to take a very nuanced position and try to pump prime the economy and sustain the growth. That is the kind of situation that is coming. Yes, the economy needs public policy support, and public policy support should be forthcoming from the fiscal authority rather than monetary authority. This is all about the global headwind. Now coming to the domestic challenges, the real GDP growth this year is expected to be 9.2%. That was given by CSO, and it is also discussed in FM's speech, and others are accepting this. But when this 9.2% was released, at that time, third wave was not in full swing. So because of the third wave, so the December, January, and February maybe, this mobility index of Nomura shows that it has again come down, likely to be recouped in a short while, but the mobility index has come down significantly. It has come down to the pre-COVID level. It has gone up significantly, it has come down. So this 9.2% growth in FY 21-22 is now doubtful. It may be somewhat less than 9.2. Of course, 9.2% growth, if you see, it is one of the highest in the world among the developing countries, major economies. But one has to see that we are growing at 9.2% at the back of minus 6.6% growth last year. There was a contraction of GDP to the extent of 6.6%. This is one of the highest in the world. So if you adjust for the contraction during 2020-21, then our real growth will be hardly 2%. Even it is lower than 1920 growth, which was 3.7%. Recent number shows 3.7%. Earlier it was 4%. Now revised to 3.7%. So this year's growth 9.2 appears to be very attractive, but against the backdrop of GDP contraction during last year. So if you knock out this base effect, growth is hardly 2%. Hardly, around 2%, 2.1 or something kind of that. So the growth is not as per our potential. We are not growing at our potential. We are growing much below its potential. Now, private investment, if you see, that remains still weak. Private investment is not forthcoming. There are several reasons why the private investment is not forthcoming. Deleveraging is taking place. There is a twin balance sheet problem. Commercial banks' balance sheets are not addressed. Corporate deleveraging is continuing, and capacity utilization is below the long period average. So the informal and contact intensive sector is yet to be fully recovered, and the third wave anyway is there. So there will be some sort of a supply disruption in the times to come. Now, this private investment has to pick up to supplement the government initiative. Otherwise, we argue that definitely government investment will crowd in private investment, but private investment has not picked up so far. Expected to pick up in the times to come, mainly because government has started or made a lot of investment during last several years. So that is a possibility that definitely private investment might be forthcoming. There is an upside risk to inflation, mainly because commodity prices and crude oil prices. Crude oil prices above 90 per barrel Brent is a threat to India's inflation. So that's why Central Bank of the country, Reserve Bank of India, is probably having no space. They have to change the gear from accommodative to neutral, and maybe they have to tighten the monetary policy in 2022 itself. Then fiscal profligacy is not affordable, mainly because the debt GDP ratio is around 90% in India. Debt GDP, I mean both central and state taken together, debt GDP ratio at 90% is very high, considering this tax GDP ratio being low. When tax GDP ratio is low, high debt GDP ratio is not sustainable. So this is the kind of scenario the government is facing. So there is a need for fiscal support. Monetary policy support is unlikely to be forthcoming, and there is a global threat of commodity prices and disruption of capital flow to the economy. Under this backdrop, the budget is presented. And I will stop here. Then we will come back to other issues in due course.
Thank you, Dr. Boy. Hitesh Bhai.
Well, the most heartening thing from my perspective, so far as this budget is concerned, is really the non-raising of new taxes, as I put it. There was a threat of an additional COVID surcharge. There was a rumor about inheritance tax, wealth tax, especially in the backdrop of the World Inequality Report brought about by not one but two organizations. One is Oxfam and the other is another organization based in Paris, which looks at these things, which had actually pointed out that India has sharply worsened so far as inequality among its citizens is concerned. So there was this fear which was perhaps prevalent. That has not happened. The only point in this budget which I feel was significant, of course, there are many small points here and there. But the most significant point is this announcement of the e-rupee, or the central bank denominated currency, which the Reserve Bank is expected to actually come out as early as the next year itself, 22-23. And I don't know whether RBI is geared up to do that in such a short time, especially considering that RBI has to take into account the interest of all its stakeholders, and especially the organized banking sector. Because quite frankly, if the cryptocurrency or official digital currency is brought out by RBI and it has widespread use, then I don't know whether this would lead to a disintermediation of the money flows and shrinkage in the credit flow that goes traditionally through the banking system. Maybe Dr. Boy can comment on this later. But at the same time, what actually surprises me is that India has chosen to treat income from cryptocurrency on the same basis as it treats speculation income or income from horse racing or lottery winning, etc., giving it the harshest possible taxation by taxing it on a gross basis, not allowing any deductions, not allowing carry forward of losses, etc. So I think that's a bit harsh. When I look at the global scenario, most countries, except barring, of course, Russia and China, which have officially banned cryptocurrency, most advanced nations have chosen to tax income from cryptocurrency either as business income or as capital gains. And in fact, most advanced countries like USA, like Australia, like Sweden, have all chosen to tax it basis capital asset and the period of holding that a person is holding on to such assets. In fact, Germany, surprisingly, treats this as only a crypto as an asset of private usage. And in fact, today, Germany is a haven for cryptocurrency because Germany, by choosing to treat crypto as a personal asset or as a private asset, actually does not want to even tax such income. Singapore, of course, does not tax capital gains in general, and therefore, in line with that policy, they don't even tax any gains on crypto, except if you are a full-time trader in crypto. Australia too taxes it depending on whether you are doing a business or whether you are holding it as a capital asset. So that, to my mind, is something which over a period of time, as regulations become more clear, we will try and see how that taxation works out. What is also a little bit distressing, though the government calls it a money trail, is this burden of 1% tax withholding to be done each time a crypto transaction is carried through. Currently, I'm not sure how this will be executed, especially because the withholding tax provisions come in as early as 1st of July. Who will do the withholding, whether it be the buyer, whether it will be the platform where such trades happen. This is all left in the sky, and today people are scrambling to find answers to how such withholding will be complied with. So with that, I think there are other minor changes we can discuss later on, but I think these are the two broad important changes which I thought are worthy of attention at this point in the beginning.
Thank you. Sunil, would you like to give your opening remarks?
Thank you, Raman. At the outset, let me express my pleasure to be a part of this panel. And as far as GST and indirect taxes are concerned, typically we do not expect too many changes in the budget for a simple reason that GST, the way we have implemented GST, it's a dual GST regime. And therefore, any changes which have to be brought about in the GST regime, they have to necessarily be approved by a council, which not only includes the central government, but also all the state governments as stakeholders. Therefore, typically, whenever you look at a budget and look at the GST component, you will find that there are some amendments which are proposed. But those amendments are, in a way, either regularizing some announcements which the GST Council had made in the past, or they might be implementing those changes. Of course, every budget we find a couple of surprises wherein we find things which have not been discussed at the GST Council come in, and there are some surprises there. But by and large, those surprises are fairly limited, and ideally they should not be there in the overall scheme of affairs, because any surprise of this nature somewhere undermines the federal structure of the entire way in which the GST has been implemented. So yes, there are a few changes, and we'll go into them a little bit in detail later. But let me at this point, because I can see there are lots of students who are hearing this discussion. So I thought many of them may not be aware of how important this piece of legislation GST has been. And being in an indirect tax space, I can tell to all the students that this is one of the most important landmark reforms which has happened in the country ever since independence. It's that important, because many of the students may not be aware of a very complicated tax regime, indirect tax regime, which we had 5 years ago. And in a life space of a tax, 5 years is actually a very small period. And over these 5 years, what have we tried to achieve through the introduction of GST? And that's where I think whenever we look at an indirect tax reform, one would look at 5 or 6 broad parameters. One is the tax should bring in uniformity. There should not be a discrimination between something which is happening in Maharashtra and something which is happening in Rajasthan, or something which is happening in Manipur, for that matter. We should bring in a one nation, one tax. There should be an efficiency in terms of the reasonableness of the taxes which have to be paid. Indirect taxes typically are on a transaction, unlike an income tax where you pay a tax on your net profit. So here we have a tax on a gross transactional level. So there are taxes on inputs and taxes on outputs. So businesses should have efficiency in claiming their input tax credit. There should not be what we say cascading of taxes. There should be a certainty of taxation. That is the most important parameter, because very closely linked with this aspect of certainty is the aspect of risk of doing business. And my co-panelist, Dr. Bhoi, highlighted this aspect, that you are seeing a reduction in private investments as compared to public investment. I think that's a reason. One needs to search for reasons. And yes, there are some reasons which we look at in terms of money supply, possible demand, but are there some factors which impede the ease of doing business? And is that also one of the reasons that some marginal players would not make a decision to invest, but may make a decision to be more invest into active businesses, but be more into financial markets, or only into that type of a space where it's much easier than as compared to a manufacturing, and where there are a number of legislations one has to look at. So that is, certainty is one factor which one will look at. And finally, any good indirect tax basis should be based on a mechanism of trust. This is something which was said by the Supreme Court way back 4 decades ago. And today, when we look at some of the amendments of this budget, those remarks of the Supreme Court in Daiichi's case become very, very relevant, and they flash to my mind when I see each of the amendments which have been brought. So are we doing something to build this trust between the taxpayer and the tax gatherer? or are we going into a zone where there is more and more distrust? So I think as we move into the discussion, we'll go into each of these parameters, and I would look at the budget amendments from a holistic perspective of all these parameters. And I would think that there is a mixed bag. There are some amendments which are in alignment or furthering these parameters, whereas there are some which are in clear conflict with those parameters. So as we move into the discussions, we'll go into this detailed aspect of it. But as of now, I would just like to talk 1 minute on the aspect of tax collections. And the finance minister also in her speech did mention that we have the highest collection in the history, highest GST collection in the month of January 22. Let's step back for a moment. Dr. Bhoi explained that yes, we are talking about a 9% GDP growth, but that 9% GDP growth is in the backdrop of a 7% contraction the previous year. So effectively, if you look at the 5-year period or a 3 to 4 year period, your GDP has not grown drastically. So there, that base is more or less constant or a small incremental base. The tax rates in 2017, we were at a 33% tax rate. Today, we are down to a tax rate of 18%. So the tax rate also has gone down. The GDP has not improved that commensurately. Ultimately, an indirect tax is a multiplier of a subset of GDP and the tax rate. And despite that, you are seeing a fundamentally high collection of GST, which perhaps shows that yes, there is a lot of compliance from the country. There is a huge increase in compliance. And I think that's a very good and a positive signal in a way. And I think when we look at some of the amendments later, I'll try revisit this aspect and try to see how we can balance this entire aspect. But I think this point is a significant factor that despite the two factors, the GDP being remaining constant and the tax rate reducing, the multiplier of that is increasing. And that I think we will keep at the backdrop of our discussions. I think this is what I would like to start my discussion with, and we'll come back to the further questions as we move into it.
Thank you, Sunil. Thank you, all the panelists. I think I'll just ask questions to each one of you on very specific topics for your quick answer and explanation and your understanding. Hitesh, well, let's start with the crypto taxation. You know, a lot of newspaper reports as old as, say, October 21 reported that there are 10 crore crypto owners in this country. This is, you know, by far the largest crypto owners in the world. US comes at about 2.7 crore crypto owners. And this, they have picked up the data from various discovery and comparison platforms. And therefore, this tax, which doesn't have, you know, a backup regulation as yet, is something to look at. What do you make out when they say that, you know, we'll tax it like you said, I'll put it in the same basket as, say, horse race or winning from lotteries and tax it at its gross value?
As I explained, you know, we have chosen to treat crypto assets as pariah. We are going to, and we have now publicly declared that we want to tax it at the highest marginal rate. Now, really, that's how we have chosen to put crypto into our tax system. And I suspect that it will continue for a few years until crypto gets a better understanding in India, at least. Because quite frankly, most of the people in India, even though you say we have 10 crore holders of crypto assets, I think that's a function of two things. One is that, you know, you have to remember that the COVID made or ensured that many people were sitting at home. And possibly some of these were, and actually the digitalization, the access to internet, etc., has sharply increased. And people felt that, okay, this was a speculative kind of a thing. You know, if you open an account and purchase some assets, and it would triple in about a month or whatever. And I think that kind of interest was like a wave, or kind of like a rage, if you will. I will not give too much importance to that, for a simple reason that out of the 10 crore people that you say, I don't know how many even understand crypto. And I think they will be possibly reducing sharply the moment they start seeing losses, or if they are exposed to some crimes where the entire exchange disappears, or they lose their money. Actually, that's the best form of education. So I would not give too much importance to that number. Also, look at the population of US and look at the population of India. I think as a percentage, we are still far less crypto holders than even the US. That is not to say that everybody can be a crypto owner. In fact, I think the addressable market class is only about 400 million people in our country. The rest are actually perhaps not in a position to access crypto markets. Now, the fact is that we've chosen to tax it in this fashion. And we have, in some senses, given some clarity, even as to my mind, the existing provisions of the Act themselves were wide enough to cover this asset class. And the existing provisions were enough to bring it to tax. Perhaps what was feared was that some income from crypto could be set off against some losses or losses in crypto could be set off against other income, etc. So I think this is a little bit of an extreme reaction because of our lack of understanding this asset better, given its newness. I would not venture more than that. We will wait and see how this whole thing unfolds. Especially, I am keen to understand what Reserve Bank is going to do in the next 12 months with its e-rupee, as it was announced in the budget.
Thank you. I just have two questions to build on this. And you rightly said that people will develop understanding when they see losses. I guess some of it has already happened as we see what is reported in newspapers and elsewhere. But the two follow-up question is, do you see any ambiguity in this definition of virtual digital currency? The second is any FEMA perspective. Will this result in any kind of a FEMA issues for people who are into crypto? And third would be, how does the whole TDS part work when we don't perhaps, and I'm not an expert, perhaps we don't know who the other side is, who is the payee?
Yeah, you raise valid questions. Only one correction. What they've mentioned is virtual digital asset. Currency specifically does not form part of it, because currency is something which is understood to be that which is issued by government fiat or with government backing.
Right.
So today's amendment or the amendment brought about on 1st of February does not cover currencies which are or will be officially issued by the Reserve Bank of India. So that is the first important point we must understand. Further, the definition is currently worded quite widely. I think, if I'm not too wrong, there was this bill to ban crypto in Parliament, which was put. I believe then Supreme Court actually frowned upon that and directed the formation of a committee to examine it. I believe the definition was more or less what was appearing in that bill. And it perhaps today wants to be as inclusive as possible to cover everything such as digital tokens or non-fungible tokens or what have you. On your second point of TDS, yes, it's a how they are going to actually discharge their liability in the absence of not knowing who the other party is remains today the biggest question. The other question was whether if you exchange, let's say, crypto assets, what happens? Will both buyer and seller have to withhold TDS? If so, how will you value that asset so as to arrive at that 1% that you are supposed to? And it's interesting to note that we already have a Supreme Court decision, Kanchanjunga Seafoods, which had already held that even if the consideration was discharged not in cash but in kind, and this was a case where the catch of the fish in the seas was actually given over to the contractor, and an argument was made by the taxpayer that because this consideration is handed over in terms of the quantity of fish, I cannot discharge my obligation to withhold TDS. The Supreme Court held that regardless of whether it is discharged in cash or in kind, the equivalent value of that fish will have to be estimated and a cash consideration will have to be deposited with the government. Obviously, the government is not going to accept a part of the fish as the TDS on that consideration. So I think to that extent, the law is very clear. It's unfortunate that the burden is now on those people who are actually doing these transactions to figure out after 1st July how they are going to discharge this liability.
And any FEMA implications that you see?
So if, let's say, these cryptocurrencies in the first place, transactions were in contravention of a Foreign Exchange Management Act. For example, today we know that there is a limit of, say, 250,000 US dollars per year, which residents can use to invest overseas. Now, if these were violated, in any case, there is a violation of FEMA, and that will be something which will need to be looked at. Also, interestingly, FEMA has also defined currency, and one will need to see whether the assets one is talking about, whether they fit into that definition as well. FEMA, otherwise, to my mind, currently at least, perhaps has a limited role to see whether the transactions themselves were within the framework applicable to all residents. But of course, Dr. Bhoy is here, and if he can supplement or correct me.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for correcting. The word virtual digital asset, and
We would all
that
know.
brings this question to Sunil, because if this were an asset, does this cause any complications under GST?
Yes, Raman. In fact, this was one question which I think is very, very important, because while people have been grappling with understanding this entire demon of cryptocurrency or the opportunity, as we put it, and this budget has talked about the direct tax part of it, there is no discussion on indirect tax. That doesn't mean that there is no indirect tax, because GST is a very universal type of a tax structure. It applies to all supplies of goods and services. And we are told services is very wide. It is anything other than goods. Therefore, if something does not constitute goods, it will constitute service, and everything is under the GST net in that manner. Only couple of exceptions have been provided. One is currency. And as Hitesh Bhai also rightly analyzed it, currency would be currency as blessed by the nation's reserve bank, nation's central bank. And therefore, when RBI comes out with its own e-rupee or whatever name we might give it to, that digital currency may be outside GST. But today, what is popularly known as Bitcoins or the Ethereums of the world, they are not currencies endorsed by RBI. And if they're not currencies endorsed by RBI, they cannot get excluded as a currency or as a transaction in money. There's another exclusion for securities. And that's where when persons invest in stock markets, they say that they don't have to pay GST because they might be regularly buying and selling stocks, but they don't pay taxes because securities are specifically excluded. Now, digital assets will not fit into currencies. It will not fit into securities at all. And therefore, this is an important aspect which investors into these digital assets need to keep in mind. There will be, or there could be, a severe exposure towards GST. And as I was highlighting in my initial talk, GST is on both procurement as well as on the supply. And it may not be only on the margin, it will be on both the legs. So if somebody is buying a crypto and also selling a crypto, both those legs of the transaction will be independently taxed. Most of the times he may not be registered. If he's not registered, there can be a challenge of input tax credit. Come to think of it like this. If we say NFT, my limited understanding is that NFT is basically digitized art. Now today, when an art house auctions art, they pay GST. What is the business case or a logical reason to keep this digital art outside the purview of GST? Perhaps none. We are somewhere saying direct taxes, we want to tax it like lotteries or horse races. Lottery organizers are today required to pay GST at the highest rate of 28%. What is the logic of not taxing crypto gains in that scenario? So all in all, if you look at it, today we are talking about metaverse where people buy properties. Now, if I book a flat, the builder charges me GST. So if we are equating a universe, a digital universe, and saying that this virtual universe is a sort of a complementary to your physical universe, naturally the taxes will also follow accordingly. And if those are not factored in, there could be a severe risk on the person who is investing. So that is, I think, a very important factor which one will need to bear in mind when one looks at investing into these types of assets.
Thank you, Sunil. Dr. Bhoi, you want to add anything? How, somebody like RBI would look at this whole sphere of crypto before we go to another question for you?
First of all, our understanding about crypto is incomplete because things are unfolding.
Right.
Nevertheless, literature is now available in the public domain. Recently, Forum of Free Enterprise has brought out something called digitization of India's payment and settlement system and the way forward. In the way forward, I have written how this central bank digital currency would look like. So it is a different creature altogether, different from the cryptocurrency. That is decentralized, and they have to skip this intermediation process. So here it is centralized, it will be regulated. So anyway, these two things are not comparable, although one can work as a substitute for the other. So anyway, regarding this FEMA violation, Mr. Sunil has explained that one can use to the extent of $250,000 for purchasing, this speculative asset. Beyond that, he has to be covered under the FEMA, because at this point of time there is probably no need for change in the FEMA for crypto transaction. This is what actually I wanted to supplement, that as of now probably there is no need for change of FEMA for the purpose of the whole idea is government would like to have or to build up an information system. Who are the people who are investing? If they are investing, whether that information is reflected in their return. That is what actually government would like to know. That 1% TDS is symbolic to know that these crypto exchanges have to report all transactions.
Right. Thank you. Dr. Bhoi, you had mentioned when we spoke earlier that you have seen quite a few elements in the budget which you would call as innovative. Would you like to tell us more about that?
Okay. For this innovative things, you might have seen in this budget, we have inclusive development, we have digitization. So India is urban and rural, divide is very intense. So urban and India is different from the rural India. What the budget is trying to establish, that the bridge or the gap between urban and rural has to be bridged. inclusive growth is very much necessary. At the same time, this, urban amenities should be taken to the rural area. So these are two different things. But government would like to bridge the gap between urban and rural India. That is the reason why inclusive growth is necessary. They have taken a lot of initiatives on account of this inclusive growth. At the same time, they wanted to have improvement in the productivity. See, growth will come from where? Growth will come from investment or increase in productivity. Investment is not increasing because private investment is slowing down. Productivity, there was also, if you see the recent trend, there was a decline in productivity. The only thing that we are expecting, government has pursued a lot of structural reforms. This is the time we should reap the benefit of increase in productivity. In this budget also, they have given emphasis to increase productivity. So if you see these innovative things in this budget, first of all, virtual economy. We are operating in a virtual economy. Central bank digital currency is virtual. Tax regime for digital assets, the government has introduced. 750 virtual labs in science and maths. Then e-passport. Means there are also other things I will tell you. This is virtual economy is taking a very prominent place, which will increase the productivity. Then come to the next big push to digitization. So digitization has started. Digitization has made tremendous progress in the payment and settlement system. Now digitization should go to the other aspects of economic activities. All activities should be digitized. Now, specifically, they have announced there should be digital university. There should be digital teachers. So the digitization, virtual economy, increasing productivity, these are something very innovative. Common man cannot probably understand, but there is a vision. Vision is how the economy will evolve during the next 25 years. Unless you digitize, unless you keep pace with the technology, you are not in a position to come out as a kind of developed country. After 25 years, I should not say that India should remain as a developing country. That is the purpose of having this. Then PM Kisan e-Vidya. E-Vidya, it is financial inclusion. At the same time, it is virtual economy. 200 TV channels so will have this e-Vidya program. So the downtrodden, they will not only be included in the mainstream, but also be acquainted with the virtual economy. So government want to empower the students in the rural area as well as urban area through this, e-Vidya for 200 TV channels. E-passport, electronic passport with embedded chips. This is again in the virtual space. This is something new that the government is thinking. And for that, you should have also the speed at which you can be able to navigate. For that, 5G has to be rolled out. Now, 200 countries in the world have 5G facilities. It is 10 times speedier than this 4G. So 5G will provide you the wherewithal to digitize the economy, to have a virtual economy, to increase productivity. So 5G will be rolled out this year. Then organic farming. See, organic farming is something new. People were talking about, green revolution, this use of fertilizer, this, that. Now they are talking in terms of, say, chemical-free and free kind of farming. It is organic farming. This organic farming, particularly think of the broccoli, avocado. They will have a big export market in the world. So the organic farming that the government is thinking, they are not only increasing the income of the farmer, but also increasing the export of the country. Then interlinking of 5 rivers. See, interlinking of 5 rivers is not a new thing. That was contemplated way back. This requires huge amount of investment. But this time, specifically, 5 rivers to be interlinked that's why government has made provision for linking of the 5 rivers. Means they are not leaving out the rural area, interlinking of rivers. Then Kisan drones, again in the virtual space, Kisan drone. So drone will make assessment of the crop, keep land records, then insecticides and other proteins or fertilizers can be spread digitally. Drone, Kisan drone. Just imagine this, how Kisans are included in the digitization program. National Tele Mental Health Program. National Tele Health Program looks like as if our people have become mentally retarded. That's why we need. It's not the case of that. Mental health program is necessary, not because of COVID, but there will be e-surgery. After 5G, doctors sitting in Delhi can make a surgery in USA. Just imagine. Is this not new? Then core banking solution to the post offices. All post office will have core banking solution. 1.5 lakh post offices in India. Core banking solution means not only financial inclusion, poor people will also be integrated to the urban activities. They can have remittance, they can have, see, now all along our financial inclusion was supply based. Direct benefit transfer, all these things were going to their door. Now it is likely to be demand based. Once the income of the poor people will increase, they will demand the financial services at their doorstep. Once it is demand driven, financial inclusion will have a quick pickup. They will be integrated to the urban or urban growth centers. Then multimodal logistic park. It appears that park is not a park. It's a multimodal logistic park. Value chain has to be strengthened. So mobility should increase for goods, services, as well as a human being. So these are some of the innovative proposals which I see in the budget will increase the productivity in the economy.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's very interesting that digital and infrastructure has received a huge push. I also saw almost 75% increase in allocation to roads. And some of the photographs given in the economic survey shows how the road network has increased dramatically in last few years. And of course, I think good work by that ministry. Hitesh bhai, a quick question for you. There is also, the budget also speaks about updating tax returns. How do you see that? Because it has so many conditions before one can, file, rather update the tax return. What is the intention behind this? Whom is it targeted to?
So when I heard the finance minister talk about this in her budget speech, and from her facial expressions, it appeared that this was a huge benefit that was being given to taxpayers who may have inadvertently left out some income. And I welcome all measures to drive more accurate and correct compliance. I was a tad disappointed when I read the fine print in the finance bill and the memorandum. This updated tax return, to my mind, if I look at it holistically, is only a kind of a soft amnesty scheme. Let's call it that. Why I'm calling it that, I'll tell you. First of all, it excludes so many cases. So first of all, and this some are understandable, some not. The understandable ones are search and seizure cases, or those who are already, sent notices under Black Money Act or Smugglers and Safema Act, things like that. Those are understandable. I can also understand if an assessment has been completed already and you exclude such persons from thereafter correcting their tax returns. Understand. It also excludes, unfortunately, all cases where any proceeding has also commenced. So, for example, going forward, Say, for example, I'm just imagining in the classically faceless assessment scheme, let's say the algorithm of the computer gets so advanced, learning from past experiences, that it automatically bases certain objective criteria and certain let's say, fundamentals, issues you immediately, almost immediately after you file the return, just a notice to say, we want to examine your case. You get barred. Further, it was not announced that it comes at a cost, and it comes at a huge cost. It was not announced in the speech. What we discovered is that if such undisclosed income is declared within 12 months of your filing the return, then on such additional income, you have to pay not only the normal tax and interest, but 25% more tax. If you make such disclosure after 12 months, but within 24 months, then the tax jumps up to 50% additional tax. Now, when we look at 25% and 50%, let's just consider somebody who is, let's say, already in the high tax rate of, say, 42%. Suppose his income is more than 5 crores, right? And he's disclosing something, say, a 10 lakh transaction. And I'll tell you how this can happen. Suppose that person has purchased shares. In good faith, he has told his banker or securities house to buy some shares. He's also paid in advance, because that's how the securities laws today work, and the exchanges insist on full payment, especially if there is a very high fever among the stock punters or enthusiasts. So he's paid for it also. Now, suppose his purchases he's not able to complete because the seller may have short sold and is not able to recover the full quantity. So what happens automatically, he gets short delivery for these shares, and these shares go through what is known in exchange terminology as an auction. Now, when these shares are auctioned, he gets a certain amount of notional credit in his account, which he maintains, which is securities dealer. Now, mind you, that amount may not have come to him because he's buying more shares, etc. He still continues with his order. So it's an inadvertent miss, and he omits, let's say, out of a bona fide reason to disclose such additional income. So now, when he files this return, let's say, after 12 months, he has to pay, remember, 25% more tax. So he's already in the 42% bracket. He will now, on that 10 lakhs of, let's say, auctioned shares income, which he gets, he will have to pay tax at 53%. Suppose he misses and he discloses after 12 months, assuming that his case is not picked up for scrutiny, etc., he has to pay 50% more tax. So from 42% on that 10 lakhs, the tax collected is how much? 63% at least. So you can see how the dice are loaded against somebody who may have even genuinely omitted to file any particular income in his tax return. Now see, such a person has already disclosed 5 crores as income. So he's already paying tax at 42%. He had really no motivation to not disclose that additional 10 lakhs, which has happened inadvertently because of the way the securities markets function. But he will be liable to pay tax at 63% plus interest. I believe that, what they are trying to do is, rather than the department going through section 148 to reopen such a case, perhaps they are nudging assessees to pay this tax and then file an updated return. And I honestly don't know how many people will actually take advantage of such a scheme, given all the points that we just discussed. And another thing, first of all, point to remember is it can never be to the prejudice of revenue. So for example, if you have forgotten to disclose a loss, suppose, you were the seller and, you forgot to disclose that money which was
Hitesh bhai, we have
covered
lost.
by your
Yeah,
securities dealer on reduce your income and possibly claim a refund. Even that is barred.
right.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
So, as I was saying, the dice is totally loaded against the taxpayer, and I really don't know how many people will be able to take advantage of this updated tax return scheme. Possibly, maybe all the implications the Honorable Finance Minister was not aware. So she announced it like a benefit or a SOP she was giving to people who may have inadvertently missed reporting their full income.
Thank you, Hitesh bhai. We have quite a few questions from the audience. Sunil, last question to you, if you can tell us very quickly about changes in input tax credit and what are the problems in this the seamless promise of seamless flow of input tax credit, and has the budget dealt with it?
Unmute, please.
Yeah.
Yes, Raman. This is one area where I was slightly disappointed with the budget because the whole objective or the unique selling proposition of GST was this phrase which you just mentioned, a seamless input tax credit, so that there is no cascading. Right from day one, there was a concept called block credits, and therefore, for example, as a policy call, the government said, if you buy a motor car, I don't want to give you input tax credit, which is also a bit of a dilution, but one would still live with it. You cannot make best an enemy of a better. It was still better than the earlier regime. So, and it was still in your control that, okay, you have identified that some of your costs will not be eligible as credit, like because they are blocked under the law. But over the period of 4 years, because of this aspect, which I highlighted, which was basically the aspect of trust between the stakeholders and the aspect of self-policing, somewhere there is that trust is replaced by the word suspicion. And somewhere it's like the entire town is painted red. And therefore, what has happened over a journey over the last 2-3 years is in the last year, we brought in an obligation that there should be a matching of input tax credit. Now, that itself is a big onerous obligation because it is not dependent on the person who claims the credit that he can match it. It depends on the supplier. It is on the wishes of the supplier that he uploads. Of course, the law obligates him to upload, but it is an action of a supplier whether he uploads the credit. Only if he uploads the credit, it can get matched. Now, we have come to a level of a 0% tolerance of unmatched credit. We are saying each and every rupee of credit for even largest of the organizations should match. That was already proposed in the last budget and made effective in the 1st January onwards. But in this budget, we have 2 more disturbing provisions which come in. One provision is that we also have to pray that the supplier has paid the taxes to the government. I can make sure that I will pay my tax. Last year, they made me ensure that the vendor uploads or discloses the transaction in his tax returns. Now, we are told that I also have to ensure that the vendor pays the tax. Now, this is really not totally in my control. What we are now told is, if you claim the credit and later on we find that the vendor has not paid the tax, we will take back the tax from you by way of reversals. We will also expect you to pay interest.
Oh my God.
Now, the pain doesn't stop here. Just because I have paid the tax does not mean that the vendor goes scot-free. His officer is going to chase him, attach his bank accounts, attach his properties, and rightly so, and collect the tax along with interest and penalties from him. When the tax and interest is paid by the vendor, maybe 2-3 years down the line, when the assets get sold and that person is caught, the law is generous enough to give me back the tax which I have repaid. Now I come back to the recipient, and the recipient gets back the tax, but he has also paid interest. That interest he is not getting back. So that is one challenge which comes in. The second aspect, so this is what we call is the paid nature of the tax by the vendor. More importantly, we are now bringing in a very new type of a thing, which is called restricted input tax credit. This is over and above the blocked credits, mismatched credits, and the unpaid credits. All those 3 things are not available to me. Even if I pass all these three hurdles, we are bringing in a fourth concept called restricted credits. Now, based on the power of data analytics, which the GST portal has thrown up, somewhere the government feels overconfident that they can, without a physical interaction or without a one-to-one interaction or going into a specific facts of a case, they can find out suspicious bogus dealers. And therefore, they have laid down some sets of possible criteria where, according to them, despite the vendor having uploaded the tax in your account, despite he having paid the tax, it's just a sort of what we loosely call hawala trades or fake invoices. The law says that in such types of situations, because we feel that the vendor, we suspect, again, there's no proof, it's just based on some suspicion that the vendor has done some fraud or something like that, we will not give you input tax credit. Now, this is actually taking things a bit far. And that's where I started my talk by saying that we are having the best GST collections. Doesn't that beset a little bit of a more trust on the taxpayers? Just because you find a few cases and all these cases are being reported, we are aware arrests have happened, you total up the collections which you have made over this 5-year period. It's hardly 5,000 crores. Yes, 5,000 crores in isolation is a big number. But 5,000 crores over a 5-year period results in 100 crore average a month. And compare that with the 1,40,000 crores which you are getting. And the type of the difficulty which this creates for a genuine taxpayer is humongous. And that's where I would somewhere feel that, when you're looking at a micro sector, small sector, they get burdened under these types of obligations. Not everyone can afford or have a battery of consultants, a battery of systems to take care of this entire process. And that's where they find that the risk of doing business is getting much larger. And that's also one of the factors which I think is creating a bit of a difficulty as far as the GST law is concerned. And this is, if we are able to bring that back, that element of trust across the stakeholders, I think we can perhaps look at a little bit of more saner laws than what we have in the GST right now. That is what I would believe broadly.
Thank you, Sunil. I will just take a few questions which have come from the audience. And probably some of them must be waiting for answers. Hitesh bhai, this one is for you. After receiving 143.1 intimation, is updation of return possible? If there is any clarity on this part.
No, in my opinion, no, because it says that where any proceeding has commenced, thereafter you can't do anything.
Dr. Bhoi, there is a question and a very futuristic one. It says, when will India reach 5 trillion economy? And news reports have said that, it could be a few years away.
See, when we are talking about 5 trillion economy, so we lost 2 years, 2021, 22. So 22 GDP is slightly above 1920 GDP. So that is the reason why if you have lost 2 years, now you have to grow at an accelerated rate, at least to recoup this loss, so that the terminal year can be extended at the most for another 2 years. Terminal year was 24-25.
Sure.
So 25-26, 26-27. I think we can reach by that time a $5 trillion economy on 2 accounts. One is productivity growth gives us a high rate of growth. Second, the rupee does not depreciate much. If rupee will depreciate much, denominator will go down, increase, then 5 trillion will not be there. So 5 trillion per se is not important. What is important is that your real GDP should grow at your potential. Your potential has been adversely affected during last 2 years. That is the reason I should take 2-3 minutes to say what is the impact of this budget. If you allow me, I can take 2-3 minutes to say what is the impact of the budget, because some of the questions might be around the impact of this budget.
Yes,
First
please.
impact, First impact is budget is definitely expansionary. That was
Okay.
necessary. It is growth positive because a lot of government investment, 7.5 lakh crores, is historic, 2.9% of the GDP, unprecedented. And if you take into account the grants in aid given to the state, it becomes more than 10 lakh crores.
Right.
So 10 lakh crores investment, definitely it is growth positive. But with this much of investment, nobody is talking that that budget is inflationary. It is non-inflationary. Why it is non-inflationary? Because your revenue expenditure, if you look at, it is more or less freezed, 0.9% increase in the revenue expenditure. And never in the history, we have freezed this expenditure at the previous year's level, revenue expenditure. Revenue deficit may be more because of your interest payment itself is around 9 lakh crores, more than 9 lakh crores, whatever. So budget is expansionary, growth positive, and non-inflationary. Second, structural reforms which has been pursued so far, and this productivity growth because of this government capital expenditure is expected to crowd in private investment, accelerate growth, and promote employment. See, employment for the sake of employment is not sustainable. You have to grow at a faster rate to provide employment. And that is what is necessary. So government is therefore more interested about investment, productivity, so that people will get employment, which is sustainable, and they will, what is called Jan Bhagidar. They will be participating in the process of growth. Third, real GDP growth at 8 to 8.5% given in the economic survey appears to be slightly optimistic, in the sense that with this level of investment, means gross fixed capital formation, 8 to 8.5% real GDP growth is probably difficult. Why I am telling this? Budget has assumed nominal GDP growth at 11.1%. So 11.1%, if you knock out 5.5% inflation, so it comes to about 6.57% growth. So there is some gap between the probably nominal GDP growth is probably conservative. Why it is conservative? Because Indian economy before the pandemic also was not growing more than 11.5% during last previous 3-4 years. That's why this year we don't have base effect. Growing at 11.1% is unlikely to give us 8% growth, because inflation anyway will be more than 5%.
Right.
That is what is. Then inclusive growth would help formalization of the economy. Everybody was talking after the demonetization, the economy is likely to be formalized. And this is a budget which has given concrete action plan how this informal sector will be formalized. The inclusive growth, if you see, there are a hell lot of proposals where food processing, this processing, that processing, so many proposals are there. So this will formalization economy is possible, mainly because government has a concrete action plan. You see, 80 lakh house in a year, affordable house, how much of employment it will create? So inclusive growth would help formalization of the economy. And revenue and expenditure numbers are realistic. Revenue growth, anyway, they have not assumed very high revenue growth, and expenditure growth also more or less realistic. Then gradual fiscal consolidation. They have not abandoned fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation is gradual. This year, 0.5% they have reduced. Knowing fully well that fiscal consolidation at this point of time is unlikely to be a growth positive, but they have increased investment, cut down this revenue expenditure, and thereby they would like to have fiscal consolidation in mind. So they are futuristic that we will not get rid of fiscal consolidation, but debt GDP ratio is creating problem. Budget is innovative and forward looking. I have given you explanation how it is innovative. India at 100 years of independence will be different from what it is now. Large government, but there are challenges. The major challenge is large government borrowing and reversal of interest rate cycle may push the cost of borrowing. There is no way out. Cost of borrowing is likely to go up. This is a challenge. Let us see how central bank is changing the gear in a gradual manner, calibrated manner. February next week there is a MPC meeting. Then inflation risk, although it is not there from within, mainly because agricultural production is also record level of production for last 4 or 5 years. So essential commodity prices are unlikely to increase, but core inflation is high and crude oil prices will create problem. So that is a challenge. There are two challenges: high market borrowing and crude oil. These are the two downsides that probably will affect the growth. So 8 to 8.5% growth is probably slightly optimistic. This is the impact.
Thank you, Dr. Bhoi. There was one, I think, last questions before we have final comments. Is that, do you feel interest hike will happen during 22-23? And, what are the ways of controlling inflation? Because like you said, if there is so much spending, but you also mentioned that it may not result in inflation. With so much money supply coming into the market, and generally people feel that their consumption power has reduced. And this is also one of the questions. How would we, deal with inflation and whether there will be, interest rate hike? I guess people wish to earn a little bit more from their tax-paid savings in a safe way.
Shall I answer?
Yes, please.
Okay. See, inflation in India from time to time, whether it is supply side problem or demand side problem. So if you see private final consumption expenditure, it is below the long period average. So demand is not there very much, although it is sustained more or less after the recovery. Final consumption expenditure as percentage to GDP has somewhat improved. On the other, supply disruption or supply is not forthcoming, because anyway, after the recovery, demand will pick up. If demand will pick up, supply response is not adequate. In that case, there will be a mismatch between demand and supply. That is the reason why one would expect that inflation is unlikely to sustain despite 7 to 8% growth during 22-23. Since the inflation is unlikely to soften despite 7.5 to 8% growth in 2022-23, then the space for monetary policy is not there. That's why probably they have to tighten in 2022-23 itself. Otherwise, they may not be able to keep the inflation rate within the range of 2 to 6%, because it is very close to 6% now. So once it is a 6%, the only thing is, see, your core inflation is high. WPI inflation is high double digit. And there is a possibility that the producers could be able to increase because they have some sort of, pricing power. Core inflation is high. And one of the reasons why the core inflation is high, mainly because government took a long time to reduce this excise duty on petrol and diesel. By that time, it has already percolated into the core inflation. And possibly, government has kept 15% decline in the excise from all these things. Excise duty is likely to contract by 15%. The option of reducing this excise duty on petrol, diesel is still there for the government. If inflation will be out of control, possibly there should be an understanding between state government and central government to jointly reduce these state taxes and central taxes. And also what they will do, the supply management has to improve. For increasing the supply management in the budget also, oil seeds production, there will be a package. Wherever we are not producing much, pulses and other things, there actually government is trying to give more incentive so that our dependence on essential commodities should be reduced.
Right.
And inflation, supply management plus demand management taken together will be deployed to control inflation, but monetary policy space is limited. Fiscal space, whatever is available, we see that government has used it in this budget. Going forward, they have to see that these are implemented in spirit and thereby inflation remains under control. and the possibility of reducing excise duty on petrol and diesel is also there.
Thank you, Dr. Boy. Sunil, Hitesh Bhai, last final words. What would you have liked that is not there and it should have been there? If we can conclude with that.
I would repeat what I said in the earlier answers. Better trust on the taxpayers is what they would expect.
Thank you. Hitesh Bhai.
I would like to see ideally a finance act which is a blank sheet of paper, the finance bill. Make no changes. Let the law stabilize. Let people understand what you have already legislated. I would be most happy in a year in which we don't have this analysis of the finance bill and maybe a long-term fiscal policy to say for the next 5 years, this is our policy. This is going to be how India's taxation trajectory is going to be, both in terms of actual taxes as well as administration, as well as what we are expecting from the taxpayers. I think I would be most happy if that were to come through.
And Dr. Boy, last word from you. Anything that you would have felt had to be there and is not there, and we really need it?
Actually, my understanding is that, corporate sector, the resolution program should be streamlined. There is a proposal in the budget that insolvency and bankruptcy code should be amended. But the IBC anyway is not working well for the speedy resolution of the corporate exit.
Sure.
Corporate exit is very much necessary. The capital is stuck up. So if big borrowers are not borrowing, this MSME cannot be a substitute for big borrowers. Big borrowers startup anyway is MSME to start with. Only a few are unicorn and others are all startups are MSME. So MSME is not a substitute for big industry. So big industries have to come out of this, legal imbroglio so that they can be able to invest and concentrate in their core activities. So that the private, if you see the capital formation in the economy, that is around say 30%, around 60 lakh crores. Out of 60 lakh crores, government is spending 10 lakh crores. So 50 lakh crores, the private sector is spending. So 50 lakh crores, if it is not increasing, the government, how much the government can be able to prime the economy. So the private investment has to be forthcoming. And government's assumption is it is growth-based stimulation. If growth will be higher, it will attract private investment, and thereby both private investment and public investment taken together will take the economy to its potential. So private investment has to anyway go up. That's why government is thinking of production linked incentive scheme,
Sure.
One window clearance, your ease
Right.
of doing business too.
Yes.
So many things they want to simplify, and so that it will be investor friendly.
Sure. Thank you so much. Yes, Dr. Boy. I think even the taking back of those laws, I hope that should result in some better climate. But we are really running out of time, so I have to thank all our speakers. Thank the forum for organizing this, Dr. Boy, Hitesh Bhai, Sunil. Thank you so much. I guess stability, trust in the taxpayer, and more private investment. That climate, I guess, should be the mantra for the next budget. Thank you so much, all the listeners, all the participants. We hope to see you next time very soon.
Thank you.